3 minutes after my stepson pushed an envelope across the Christmas table and told me to sign it, nobody was eating anymore. His wife had stopped smiling. My husband looked as if someone had knocked the air out of him, and Jason, who had spent most of the day treating me like a piece of worn-out furniture, had finally realized the burden sitting beside his father, understood every word on those pages, but that came later. That Christmas morning began quietly enough. I woke at 6:10 to the sound of the furnace clicking on and the ache in my right knee reminding me that Indiana winters had become less charming with age. The bedroom was still dark. Outside, a thin layer of snow covered the roofs along our street in Carmel, and somebody across the road had left their white Christmas lights blinking all night. Richard was already dressed. He stood in front of the closet wearing gray slacks and the green sweater I'd bought him the year before. At 67, he still had broad shoulders from decades of walking construction sites, though lately he seemed to fold inward whenever his son's name came up. "You're awake," he said. My knee filed a complaint. That earned a small smile. On the chair beside the bed, he had laid out the camel-colored coat he'd given me for my birthday. It was soft, expensive, and flattering in a way most winter coats stop trying to be after size 12. "You should wear that one," he said. "Jason keeps the house cold." I looked toward the closet. My old navy wool coat hung near the back. I had owned it for nearly 15 years. The cuffs were polished from wear, one button had been replaced with something close but not exact, and it fit more snugly than it used to. Retirement had added 12 pounds to me. Not all at once, a pound here, 2 there, less walking through courthouse corridors, more lunches with friends, more evenings sitting beside Richard while he watched old westerns and pretended not to fall asleep. I reached for the navy coat. Richard frowned. "Why that one?" "It's warm." "Margaret." I knew what he was really asking. Jason had made comments before, nothing direct enough for Richard to confront without being accused of overreacting. He had asked whether my little pension covered my personal expenses. He had joked that his father had always collected people who needed saving. Once, at a backyard cookout, he'd told a neighbor I was enjoying a comfortable retirement thanks to Dad. Richard had corrected him later, privately. That distinction had started to matter. "I like the old one," I said. It wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I wanted to know who Jason and Emily became when they believed there was nothing to gain from impressing me. No title, no money, no useful connection. Just an older woman in a tired coat who had married into their family. Even as I buttoned it, I felt a little ashamed of myself. Healthy families should not require secret tests. But then, healthy families usually don't make you wonder whether kindness depends on the price tag sewn inside your collar. We left just after 10. Richard drove his Buick Enclave north along Keystone Parkway while I balanced a pecan pie on my lap. Traffic slowed near a Kroger where shoppers were still rushing in for forgotten dinner rolls and batteries. Richard kept both hands on the wheel. "Let's try to have a nice day," he said. "I always try." "You know what I mean." I looked out at the snowbanks along the road. "I do." Jason lived in one of those subdivisions where every house looked designed to appear larger than the family inside it. His front lawn had fresh landscaping despite the season. A leased Cadillac Escalade sat in the driveway with a red bow on the hood. Through the front windows, I could see an enormous stone fireplace and a Christmas tree tall enough to need its own permit. Jason opened the door before we reached it. "Dad!" He pulled Richard into a hug and slapped his back. Then he looked at me. His eyes dropped to my coat. "Merry Christmas, Margaret." No hug, not even the performance of one. Emily appeared behind him wearing cream-colored pants, gold earrings, and a sweater that looked too delicate to survive contact with gravy. Her smile paused when she saw me. "Oh, Margaret," she said. "You should have told me you needed something warmer." The coat was lined wool. I could have stood at a bus stop in it. "That's thoughtful," I said. "I'm comfortable." Jason took the gift bag from Richard's hand and walked away. I remained in the entryway holding the pie and 2 wrapped boxes until Daniel came around the corner. He was 17, tall and narrow, with dark hair that always seemed one haircut overdue. "Here, Grandma Margaret." He took the boxes first, then the pie. "Careful with that," I said. "It took me 2 attempts." "What happened to the first one?" "Your grandfather found it." From the living room, Richard called, "I heard that." Daniel smiled. It was the first genuine warmth I'd felt since arriving. The afternoon unfolded in small cuts. Emily seated me near the kitchen doorway, where cold air slipped in whenever someone entered through the garage. Daniel quietly moved my chair 6 inches closer to the fireplace. Jason showed Richard photos from a resort in Cabo and mentioned twice that their suite had cost more per night than some people's monthly retirement checks. Later, while opening a bottle of bourbon, he said, "Dad always did have a soft spot for strays." Emily laughed. Richard's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. That hurt more than Jason's remark. I remembered the man Richard had been when we first met. A retired civil engineer who still corrected crooked handrails in restaurants. A man who had once stopped a contractor twice his size from bullying a young inspector. Now he studied the ice melting in his glass. During dinner, Jason talked about protecting family assets. He brought up trusts, inheritance taxes, medical costs, and people who marry late in life for security. Nobody said my name. They didn't need to. I noticed other things, too. A stack of mail near the home office had been turned face down. One envelope carried a red overdue stamp. Emily flinched when Jason mentioned the new kitchen. And when Richard complimented the Escalade, Jason changed the subject before his father could ask whether they had bought or leased it. By the time dessert arrived, I no longer thought their cruelty came from confidence. It came from fear. Jason disappeared into the office and returned carrying a thick cream-colored envelope. He sat down, smoothed one hand over the tablecloth, and pushed it toward me. "This is just something responsible adults should put in writing." Richard looked from the envelope to his son. "What is that?" Jason kept his eyes on me. "It protects you, Dad." "From what?" He gave a small, practiced smile. "From being taken advantage of." I placed my hand on the envelope but did not open it. In that moment, I understood something very clearly. The Christmas invitation had never been about bringing the family together. Nobody reached for the pie. Jason leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who believed the evening was already over. "Go ahead," he said. "You'll see it's nothing personal." I looked at Richard. He looked genuinely confused. "I've never seen that before," he said quietly. Jason chuckled. "We talked about it, Dad." Richard frowned. "About what?" "Protecting yourself." The room settled into an uncomfortable silence. Outside, I could hear children somewhere on the next street laughing as they dragged sleds across frozen lawns. Inside, all I could hear was the ticking of the grandfather clock in Jason's dining room. I opened the envelope. The first page was titled Family Financial Protection Agreement. I had seen thousands of legal documents during my years on the bench. This wasn't one of them. It was obviously copied from an online template. Different fonts, uneven spacing, clauses that contradicted one another. Whoever assembled it knew just enough legal language to sound official, without understanding how any of it worked. I kept my face perfectly neutral. Jason mistook my silence for intimidation. Emily folded her hands together. "We're only trying to avoid misunderstandings later." I continued reading. The document declared that Richard's house, retirement assets, and personal accounts belonged exclusively to his biological family. Fine. Margaret Hale had never expected otherwise. The second section required me to waive any future claim for financial support from Richard. Again, unnecessary. I'd never depended on him financially. The third section caught my attention. If Richard died before me, I would have 30 days to vacate our home. 30 days. After burying a husband. I looked up. "Who wrote this?" Jason shrugged. "It's pretty standard." "According to whom?" "A guy I know." "What kind of guy?" "A guy who's been through this." That wasn't an answer. I turned another page. It required me to pay half of every future household repair, medical expense, insurance increase, and property tax adjustment. Interesting, considering I already paid my share voluntarily. Then I reached the final section. It authorized Jason Collins to assist Richard with significant financial decisions if Richard became unable or unwilling to manage certain financial obligations. That wording made me pause. Not because it frightened me, because it was strangely broad. I read it again. Richard leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Jason answered before I could. "It just means I'd help you if something happened. I never agreed to that. You said you wanted me involved." "I said I wanted you to know where my paperwork was." Those weren't remotely the same thing. Jason laughed nervously. "Dad, you're getting hung up on wording." I closed the packet. "Words matter." Jason looked irritated. "They matter to lawyers. They matter to everyone." Emily sighed dramatically. "We're trying to avoid family drama." The irony almost made me smile. Richard rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I don't understand why we're discussing this today." Jason answered immediately. "Because everybody's together." "No," Richard said, "because you planned this." Jason's jaw tightened. For the first time that afternoon, he looked slightly uncomfortable. Emily quickly stood. "Who wants more wine?" She picked up an expensive electric corkscrew from the counter, pressed the button. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. Jason frowned. "I charged that." Daniel quietly walked over, opened a drawer, and handed her an ordinary corkscrew. "This one always works." Emily muttered something under her breath while everyone watched her struggle with the expensive gadget. I couldn't help thinking, the house had 3 giant televisions, 2 refrigerators, and apparently no machine capable of opening a bottle of wine. Even Richard let out a tiny laugh. The tension eased for maybe 15 seconds. Then Jason looked back at me. "So," he tapped the agreement. "Are you signing it?" "No," his smile disappeared. "You didn't even think about it." "I thought about it while I was reading." "You don't trust us?" I met his eyes. "I don't sign legal documents prepared by unnamed people over Christmas dinner." Emily folded her arms. "If you've got nothing to hide, why not?" Richard looked at her. "Emily." She ignored him. "I mean, honestly, if Margaret isn't interested in Dad's money, what's the problem?" I answered calmly. "The problem isn't what I'm giving up. It's what Richard is giving away." Jason leaned forward. "Nobody's taking anything from Dad." I slid one page toward him. "Then explain this authorization." He glanced down. "That's just in case." "In case of what?" "In case he needs help." "Who decides that?" Jason hesitated. "Well, the document doesn't say." He shifted in his chair. "You always make everything sound complicated." "No," I smiled politely. "I simply read what people write." Richard looked at his son. "Jason, did you actually have someone review this?" Jason avoided eye contact. "I downloaded a template." "I thought you said somebody helped." "They did." "Who?" Jason never answered. Instead, he reached for the papers. I placed my hand on them first. Not aggressively, simply enough to stop him. Then something attached behind the agreement caught my attention. Several financial schedules. One page listed a business credit line, $185,000. Under the guarantor section appeared Richard Collins' name. I slowly looked at my husband. "Richard," he leaned over. "I've never seen that." Jason answered almost too quickly. "It's only an application." "Did you submit it?" "It's paperwork." "Jason." "It's nothing." I studied the signature. At first glance, it looked genuine. But something bothered me, the date format, the spacing. The scan quality, tiny details, nothing that proved anything, not yet. Still, years on the federal bench had taught me something. Most people focus on signatures. Judges learn to notice everything surrounding them. "When was this signed?" I asked. Jason shrugged. "I don't remember." Richard stared at the page. "I don't remember signing any business guarantee." "You did." "No, you just forgot." Richard's face hardened. "I may forget where I leave my reading glasses." He looked directly at his son. "I don't forget guaranteeing nearly $200,000. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel quietly stood. I need to show Grandma Margaret something." Jason immediately looked up. "What?" "It'll only take a minute." "What is it?" Daniel swallowed. "Please." Margaret, the judge inside me, wanted answers immediately. Margaret, the wife, wanted to protect Richard. Margaret, the grandmother Daniel deserved, could see fear in a 17-year-old boy who had clearly been carrying something much too heavy for much too long. I nodded. "Lead the way." As we stepped into the hallway, Daniel looked over both shoulders to make sure nobody had followed us. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "That signature." He took a shaky breath. "Dad's been using it on other papers too." Daniel led me into the laundry room and quietly closed the door behind us. The washing machine hummed in the corner. Someone had forgotten a basket of clean towels on top of the dryer, and the scent of detergent almost made the room feel peaceful. It was strange how ordinary places could become the setting for moments that changed families forever. He stood there for several seconds without saying a word. I didn't rush him. One lesson I'd carried home from nearly 20 years on the federal bench was that silence often invited the truth more effectively than another question. Finally, he looked up. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For waiting this long." I softened my voice. "You haven't done anything wrong." "I think I have." He rubbed his palms together nervously. "I should have told Grandpa weeks ago." My heart sank a little. Weeks. Whatever this was, he'd been carrying it alone for weeks. What happened? He took a slow breath. "About a month ago, Dad asked me to fix the printer in his office." "You know computers?" He gave a faint smile. "Better than Dad." I believe that. The tiny smile disappeared almost immediately. It wouldn't reconnect to Wi-Fi. I restarted it. He swallowed. When it came back on, it started printing old jobs that had been stuck in memory. He looked embarrassed, almost guilty. I wasn't trying to snoop. "I know. I swear. I believe you." He opened his phone. "I took pictures because I didn't know what I was looking at." He scrolled through several photos before handing me the phone. The first image showed a page stamped, "Notice of Default." The second was an email discussing a commercial credit line. The third stopped me cold. It contained a scanned signature page bearing Richard's name. Not the complete agreement, just the signature page. I zoomed in. Then another photograph. An email. "My father has approved the guarantee. I'll send the signature page tonight. No complete contract, no loan package, just the signature page." I felt a familiar sensation settle over me. Not anger, focus. Over the years, I'd watched hundreds of lawyers jump to conclusions because they were convinced they already knew the answer. Evidence deserved patience. "What did your father tell you?" "Nothing." "You asked him?" Daniel nodded. "He grabbed everything off the printer and said it wasn't my business." "And these?" "I kept the copies that printed before he noticed." He hesitated. "I hid them inside one of my chemistry books." I looked back at him. "You've been carrying this by yourself?" "I didn't know who to trust." That sentence hurt more than anything Jason had said all afternoon. A 17-year-old should never have to wonder which adult was safe. I handed the phone back. "Daniel, these papers raise serious questions." I knew something was wrong. "But they don't prove everything?" He blinked. "They don't?" "No." His shoulders slumped. "I thought they did. They suggest something happened." I chose every word carefully. "They don't tell us exactly how it happened." He nodded slowly. I could almost see him processing the difference. Suspicion, evidence, proof, three very different things. "Grandpa never would have signed that," he whispered. "What makes you so certain?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because he reads everything." That made me smile despite the circumstances. "Yes," I said. "He usually does." "Unless?" He stopped himself. "Unless what?" Dad told him it wasn't important. His voice cracked slightly. That happens a lot. I didn't interrupt. When Grandpa comes over, Dad always says things like, "Just sign here," or "It's only paperwork." Grandpa trusts him. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Trust. That was always the easiest thing to exploit. Daniel leaned against the dryer. They've been fighting about money for months. I thought everything was going well. They want people to think that. He laughed bitterly. The Escalade? He rolled his eyes. It's leased. The kitchen? Financed. The vacation? Credit cards. He looked exhausted. I hear them almost every night. I stayed quiet. My mom wants to sell the house. And your father? He says one more promotion will fix everything. Daniel looked down at his shoes. He always says one more thing will fix everything. There it was. Not greed, desperation. That didn't excuse what Jason might have done, but it explained how ordinary people sometimes convinced themselves extraordinary dishonesty was temporary. His next words surprised me even more. He took money from my college account. I looked up. How much? I don't know exactly. He told you? No. I checked the balance. Daniel forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When I asked, Dad said Grandpa had needed help. And? I asked Grandpa. He looked directly at me. He had no idea what I was talking about. That explained why Daniel no longer trusted easy answers. He'd already caught one lie. He feared there were more. For just a moment, my mind drifted backward. Years earlier, I'd sentenced a respected Indianapolis business owner. First offense, no violence, no criminal history. He had forged one authorization because he believed he could replace the money before anyone noticed. Then another, then another. By the time the truth surfaced, dozens of employees had lost retirement savings. When I asked him during sentencing where everything had started, he answered with words I'd never forgotten. I only needed another month. Financial deception rarely began with evil. It usually began with panic. And panic, left alone long enough, often became something much worse. A vibration in my purse pulled me back. Elaine. She'd been my courtroom clerk for nearly 18 years before we both retired. I stepped a few feet away before answering. "Merry Christmas," she said cheerfully. "Merry Christmas." "You sound like somebody just served you a subpoena." I laughed despite myself. "You always did know me too well." Her tone changed immediately. "What happened?" Without giving details, I asked if she still knew an Indianapolis attorney who specialized in elder financial exploitation. She didn't hesitate. "Thomas Avery." "I thought so. I'll text you his number." Then she added, "And Margaret?" "Yes? You are retired." "I am. That means you're no longer allowed to cross-examine people before they've finished dessert." I smiled. "I'll do my best." When I hung up, Daniel looked at me anxiously. "What are we going to do?" "We're going back in there." "And then?" I rested a hand gently on his shoulder. "We're going to ask questions." "You think Dad's going to tell the truth?" "I honestly don't know." He reached into his backpack, which he'd quietly brought into the laundry room while I was on the phone. From inside, he pulled out a thick school folder. "I brought the originals." I stared at him. "You kept them?" I thought, if something happened to my phone... He handed me the folder. Before I could respond, the laundry room door opened. Emily stood there. She looked nervous. Everyone's waiting. Her eyes landed on the folder in my hands. Then she looked at Daniel. Finally, she said something that made every piece of the puzzle shift. "I didn't know Jason used your father's signature like that." The room fell silent. She covered her mouth. Too late, she realized she'd admitted far more than she'd intended. I looked at her carefully. "You thought Richard had already agreed?" Emily nodded weakly. That's what Jason told me." I understood something in that instant. Emily wasn't innocent. But she wasn't the architect either. Someone else had been lying to her, too. I tucked the folder under my arm. Let's go finish Christmas dinner. Because for the first time all day, I finally knew where to begin. When I walked back into the dining room, every conversation stopped. Richard looked up first. His eyes went to the folder tucked beneath my arm. Jason noticed it a second later. His confidence didn't disappear, but it shifted. Like a man who had just realized the game he'd been enjoying might not be following the rules he expected. "Everything okay?" he asked. I took my seat without answering immediately. Daniel sat beside me instead of across the table. It was a small decision, but everyone noticed. Emily remained standing for a moment, before slowly lowering herself into her chair. She couldn't quite meet Jason's eyes. The pecan pie sat untouched in the center of the table. I folded my hands. "Richard," I said, "I'd like everyone to stay seated for a few minutes." He nodded. Jason gave a short laugh. "What is this, a family meeting?" "No," I looked directly at him. "It's a conversation." He leaned back with exaggerated confidence. "Fine." I turned to Richard. "When do you remember signing paperwork for Jason's business?" Richard frowned immediately. "I don't." "Think carefully." He closed his eyes for a second. "About 6 weeks ago, Jason asked me to sign what he called updated emergency contact forms." Jason jumped in. "That's what I'm talking about. You signed them." Richard looked confused. "I signed one page." "Exactly. Not loan documents." Jason waved dismissively. "It was part of the same packet." I didn't respond to him. Instead, I asked another question. "Richard, did you read every page?" There weren't multiple pages. Jason's jaw tightened. I reached into the folder. "I'd like everyone to look at this." I placed one printed email on the table. Nobody touched it. Jason glanced down only briefly before looking away. I read aloud. "My father has approved the guarantee. I'll send the signature page tonight." Silence. Richard looked from the paper to his son. "What guarantee?" Jason sighed dramatically. "Oh, come on." "No," Richard replied quietly. "What guarantee?" Jason rubbed both hands across his face. "It's a business line of credit. You told me those papers were emergency contacts." "They basically were." "No," Richard's voice became firmer. "They weren't." I slid another document toward the center of the table. "This email is dated December 3rd. Then I picked up the scanned signature page. "This signature page was created November 22nd. I let that sit for a moment. "The final guarantee agreement wasn't generated until December 3rd. Nobody spoke. I continued calmly. "So, I'd like to understand how Richard knowingly signed terms that didn't yet exist," Jason finally snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I may not. So stop pretending." I folded my hands again. "Then explain it." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked toward Emily. She stared at the table. Jason tried another approach. "You've been poisoning Dad against me since you married him." Richard looked shocked. "What?" Jason pointed directly at me. "You walked into this family acting like you're better than everyone." "I never said that." "You didn't have to." He stood. "You judge everybody." I almost smiled. Old habits die slowly. After nearly 2 decades wearing a black robe, I had learned that people often became their least convincing when they were closest to the truth. I asked 4 factual questions. You interrogated me. I asked when the agreement was created. I asked what Richard believed he signed. You always twist things. I asked who prepared the document. Jason slapped one hand on the table. "There." He looked triumphantly around the room. "That's exactly what I mean." Emily blinked. "What?" "She always has to win." I answered before anyone else could. "This isn't about winning." "It always is with you." His breathing had become noticeably faster. "I've watched you ever since Dad married you." He jabbed a finger toward me. "You act like you're smarter than everybody." "I've never claimed that." "You don't have to." Then came the sentence he'd been carrying around for years. You live off my father and still act like you're above us. Nobody moved. Richard immediately spoke. Jason! No, Dad. Jason kept staring at me. Tell everybody I'm wrong. The room became impossibly still. Even the furnace had stopped running. I looked at Jason for several seconds, then I answered in the same calm voice I'd used all evening. I have never accepted $1 from your father. He laughed. A single sarcastic laugh. Sure. I've never needed to. Oh, really? Yes. So how exactly do you support yourself? Richard quietly closed his eyes. He already knew where this was going. I answered simply, my retirement income is a little over $27,000 a month. Jason smiled. Then he realized nobody else was smiling. Emily stared. Daniel looked relieved. Richard remained silent. Jason frowned. What? I receive approximately $27,000 each month. He blinked twice. That's impossible. No. It isn't, Emily whispered. 27. I nodded. My judicial retirement, investment income, and an annuity. Jason looked genuinely confused. What judicial retirement? I met his eyes. I served as a federal judge before I retired. Nobody spoke, not even Jason. Finally, he looked at Richard. You knew? Richard answered quietly. Of course I knew. You never told us. Richard looked almost disappointed. You never asked. Jason stared back at me. You let us think. I let you think whatever you chose. I thought. I know what you thought. There wasn't anger in my voice, only sadness. You assumed an older woman wearing an old coat must be dependent on your father. Emily slowly covered her mouth. Oh my God! I never corrected you because my finances weren't your business. I looked down at the agreement again. But your father's certainly are. Jason suddenly reached across the table. He grabbed the folder. This is ridiculous. Before anyone reacted, he turned toward the fireplace. The flames crackled softly inside. For one terrifying second, I believed he was actually going to throw the papers into the fire. Then another chair scraped across the hardwood floor. Daniel! He stepped directly between his father and the fireplace. His hands were shaking. His voice wasn't. Go ahead! Jason froze. Burn those. Daniel took his phone from his pocket. I scanned every page 2 weeks ago. The room fell completely silent. Jason stared at his own son as though he no longer recognized him. Behind them, Richard slowly pushed back his chair. He stood. His shoulders looked broader than they had all afternoon. He held out one hand. Not toward me, toward Jason. His voice was quiet. But for the first time that day, it sounded like the man I had married. Give me my papers. Jason didn't hand Richard the papers. For several long seconds, father and son simply stood there looking at each other. I'd watched men face prison sentences with steadier hands than Jason had at that moment. His confidence hadn't disappeared. It had fractured. He was trying to decide which version of the truth might still save him. Finally, he tossed the folder onto the dining table. There, he said. Happy now? Richard didn't answer. He carefully picked up the folder as though it contained something fragile. In a way, it did. Trust. Once broken, it never fit together quite the same. Emily spoke first. Jason, just tell us what happened. I already have. No, her voice trembled. You haven't. He turned toward her. You knew we needed that loan. I knew we needed money. Same thing. It isn't the same thing. Emily looked at the documents scattered across the table. You told me your father had agreed to help. He did. Richard finally spoke. I agreed to update emergency contacts. You signed. I signed one page. It was legally attached. Richard looked at him with genuine disbelief. You told me it was contact information. Jason threw both hands into the air. Because if I'd told you what it really was, you would have said no. The room fell silent. He seemed to realize what he'd admitted only after the words had left his mouth. Nobody had trapped him. He had trapped himself. Daniel slowly sat back down. He looked exhausted. I knew that feeling. Sometimes the hardest part wasn't telling the truth. It was surviving the silence that followed. Jason tried to recover. "You don't understand what it's like." Richard stared at him. "What don't I understand?" "The pressure?" Jason's voice rose. "You think everything's easy because you retired 30 years ago." "I retired 5 years ago. You know what I mean?" "No," Richard shook his head. "I honestly don't." Jason began pacing. "I lost the Indianapolis account." Emily closed her eyes. "I told you not to bring that up." "It's already out." He laughed bitterly. "The company cut commissions. Then interest rates went up. The remodel cost twice what we were quoted. Daniel's tuition is coming. The Escalade lease—" "The Escalade?" Emily interrupted sharply. "We never needed that car." "You wanted it." "I wanted something reliable." "You wanted people to think we were successful." Emily stood. "I wanted us to stop pretending." Her words hung in the air. For the first time all evening, they weren't arguing with me. They were arguing with each other. Jason looked around the room as though searching for an ally. There wasn't another choice. "There is always another choice," I said quietly. He turned toward me. "You don't know what it's like to build a business." "No." "I know what it's like to watch people convince themselves that one dishonest decision will fix everything." He scoffed. "I wasn't stealing." "You presented your father with one document while intending it to become part of another." "I was going to pay it back." "I believe you intended to." He frowned, surprised by my answer. "I also believe intentions don't erase consequences." For a moment, I saw something different in his face. Not arrogance, not anger, fear, real fear. "I only needed another few months," he said. The words caught me off guard. Years earlier, I'd heard almost the exact sentence from a businessman standing before me in federal court. He had believed one unauthorized signature would save his company. Instead, it destroyed it. People rarely planned to become dishonest. Most simply kept postponing the moment they admitted they needed help. Jason rubbed both hands over his face. "I was going to fix it." Richard asked quietly, "When?" Jason didn't answer. "When the promotion came." "What if it never came?" Jason looked away. Richard took a slow breath. "I would have lost my retirement?" "You wouldn't have. You don't know that." "I would have protected you." Richard gave a sad little smile. "You were supposed to protect me before you asked me to sign." That sentence broke something. Not in Jason, in Richard. His shoulders sagged. His eyes filled. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked every one of his 67 years. "I kept making excuses for you," he said softly. Jason swallowed. "Dad, I told Margaret you were under stress." Richard looked down at the table. "I ignored things because I was afraid." Nobody interrupted him. "I was afraid if I pushed too hard," he paused, "you'd stop letting me see Daniel." Jason's head lifted. "I would never—" Richard looked straight at him. "Wouldn't you?" Jason couldn't answer. That silence answered for him. Daniel quietly spoke. "Dad," Jason turned. "I'm not against you." His son sounded older than 17. "I just don't want Grandpa to lose everything." Jason's eyes watered. "I did this for all of us." Daniel shook his head. "No. You don't understand. I understand that every time something went wrong, you told another lie." Nobody moved. I finally reached for my phone. "I'm calling an attorney tomorrow morning." Jason looked alarmed. "You'd really do that?" "I won't call former colleagues. I didn't ask that. I won't call anyone who owes me a favor." He looked confused. "This isn't about punishing you." "It feels like it. It's about protecting Richard." I turned toward my husband. "Tomorrow we'll notify the lender." Richard nodded. "We'll preserve every document." Another nod. "We'll review exactly what you signed." "Yes. We'll freeze any additional access to your financial records." Richard answered before Jason could object. "Do it." Jason looked desperate. "Dad." Richard slowly raised his hand. No! It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was simply finished. I've defended you for years. He looked directly into his son's eyes. I won't defend deception. Jason sat down heavily. Emily wiped away tears. I'll sell the jewelry. Jason looked at her. What? The bracelets. You don't have to. I'm tired of pretending. She gave a weary laugh. I don't even like half the things we bought. Daniel managed the smallest smile of the evening. Emily reached into Jason's jacket pocket, took his car keys, and dropped them into my empty coffee cup. The metallic clink echoed through the quiet room. You've been drinking wine all afternoon, she said. If you're leaving angry, you're not driving. Even Richard let out the faintest breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Jason stared into the cup, then at Emily, then at Daniel. He looked like a man seeing his family clearly for the first time. Whether he liked what he saw was another matter. That night, after everyone finally left the dining room, Richard found me standing alone in the kitchen. Snow had started falling again outside. I'm sorry, he whispered. I nodded. I know. No, his voice broke. I should have stopped this long before today. I looked at the man I'd grown to love. I can forgive being insulted. He waited. I can't live in a marriage where keeping the peace matters more than protecting each other. He lowered his head. I understand. I hope you do. Because for the first time since we'd married, I wasn't sure whether love alone would be enough. Christmas ended quietly. Not happily, just quietly. Richard and I drove home through falling snow without turning on the radio. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in slow rhythm while the streets of Carmel emptied for the night. About halfway home, Richard reached for my hand. I let him hold it. I wasn't ready to squeeze back. Some wounds needed more than apologies. The next morning, we canceled breakfast with neighbors and sat at our kitchen table with coffee growing cold between us. Richard looked older than he had 2 days before. Not physically, emotionally. I don't know where to begin, he admitted. You already have. He looked up. You finally stopped pretending nothing was wrong. Around 9 o'clock, Richard called Thomas Avery, the attorney Elaine had recommended. Thomas arrived at our house the following afternoon carrying nothing more dramatic than a legal pad and a travel mug from Starbucks. He spent nearly 3 hours reviewing every document. When he finally leaned back in his chair, he looked at Richard. The good news is that you signed only 1 page. Richard nodded slowly. The bad news? Thomas chose his words carefully. That signature appears to have been attached to a guarantee agreement you were never shown. So, Richard swallowed. What happens now? We notify the lender immediately. Thomas explained that situations like this weren't resolved overnight. The bank would review the documents, the loan broker would be contacted, electronic records would be examined, there might be civil proceedings, there might be criminal questions. Nobody knew yet. And unlike television, nobody honest was going to pretend they already knew the ending. Richard appreciated that. So did I. The lender suspended any additional activity connected to the guarantee while the matter was investigated. Jason hired his own attorney within the week. For the first month, we barely heard from him. Then, little by little, reality replaced pride. The Escalade disappeared from the driveway. The custom fishing boat he'd purchased the previous summer quietly went up for sale. A contractor removed the decorative stone entryway that had never actually been paid for. Emily accepted a full-time administrative position with a medical supply company in Indianapolis. One afternoon, she stopped by our house carrying a bakery box from Long's Donuts. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just wanted to stop lying. She admitted she'd ignored warning signs because she enjoyed the life they appeared to have. I kept telling myself we'd catch up. I nodded. So did Jason. She smiled sadly. And that's exactly why we never did. Several weeks later, she and Jason agreed to separate for a while. Not because of one Christmas dinner, because the dinner had exposed years of avoiding difficult conversations. Daniel stayed with us through the remainder of the school year. The guest bedroom slowly filled with chemistry textbooks, basketball shoes, and enough phone chargers to power a small airport. He was a good roommate. He loaded the dishwasher without being asked. He shoveled snow before I woke up. He insisted on carrying groceries because he knew my knees still bothered me when the weather turned cold. One Saturday afternoon, I found him staring at a college application essay. I've rewritten the first paragraph 12 times. That's because you're trying to sound impressive. I am. Try sounding honest instead. He looked at me. What if that's not enough? It usually is. A few months later, acceptance letters arrived from Purdue, Indiana University, and Ball State. Richard cried before Daniel did. We helped with tuition the same way we'd always planned. The payments went directly to the university, not because Daniel had exposed his father, because he'd earned the opportunity. Richard also began counseling. Those Tuesday afternoon appointments changed him more than I expected. At first, he apologized constantly. Then one day he stopped apologizing and started changing. He no longer made excuses when Jason called. He no longer confused peace with silence. Most importantly, when something bothered him, he said it immediately, not 6 months later. As for me, I made one confession of my own. One evening while we were walking around the pond at Central Park in Carmel, I admitted why I'd worn the old navy coat that Christmas. Richard stopped walking. You were testing us. I was. He looked out across the frozen water for a long time. I hate that you felt you needed to. So do I. I passed the test. I smiled gently. Not the first half. He laughed. No, definitely not. But, he slipped his hand into mine. I'd like another chance. You've been earning it. Retirement changed a little too. I joined a water aerobics class at the Monon Community Center to help my knee. The first morning, the instructor handed me a bright floral swim cap. After 20 years wearing a black judicial robe, I found myself doing leg lifts beside 3 retired school teachers and one 74-year-old woman who could outswim everyone in the pool. Life has a sense of humor if you're willing to notice it. The following Christmas looked nothing like the previous one. Richard and I hosted dinner. No designer decorations, no luxury cars parked outside. Just pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, homemade rolls, and the pecan pie that actually turned out right on the first attempt. Emily came. Daniel came home from Purdue for winter break. Jason didn't. Instead, Richard received a handwritten letter. Jason admitted he had lied. He admitted he had let pride become more important than honesty. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask anyone to fix what he'd broken. He asked only for the chance to earn trust again someday. Richard folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. He wasn't ready to answer. Neither was I. Healing doesn't move according to holiday schedules. After dinner, Daniel handed me a plain white envelope. I laughed. You know, envelopes make me nervous now. He grinned. I promise this one's safer. Inside was a simple Christmas card. Only one sentence was written beneath his name. You taught me that quiet people can still do the right thing. I read it twice before closing it. Looking back, people sometimes ask whether revealing my career or my retirement income was the real revenge. It wasn't. Money only corrected a false assumption. My former title only explained why I recognized the warning signs. The real victory came when I stopped accepting disrespect simply because keeping everyone comfortable seemed easier. Growing older teaches you that dignity isn't something other people hand you. It's something you protect, even when your voice shakes and the people across the table share your last name. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your appearance, or the quiet life you've chosen, I hope you remember this. You don't have to prove your worth to everyone, but you do have the right to expect respect. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of someone or something in your own life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments.